of the LGA, we're working with the independent group office today, just to try and give a little update on planning and some of the things that have been announced recently and what they're going to mean for local authorities. We've structured this to sort of look at sort of 4 elements, I suppose, 3 elements of planning and 1 opportunity, which we think is which we think we would like to kind of grasp with this at the moment. So we sort of split the planning process out into sort of 3 bits, which is looking at some of the changes that have been noted around national planning policy and local plan function, looking at some of the changes that have been noted around development management, so the handling of planning applications and what that's going to mean. There's been a lot of things that have come out recently regarding planning for the environment and how that function has changed and how the process at local authorities have changed, a role that they have to have. And so we're going to cover a large element of that. There's quite a lot in there, actually. So there's a few bits we're going to try and get through from that. And then we want to take the opportunity, because having a group of councillors in the room, virtual room together, to promote the peer work, actually, that the LGA undertakes, and the vital role that councillors play in this for planning particularly. So we just wanted to sort of explain the role and the work that PAS does with councillor peers. But also I'm really pleased that Councillor Julian German from Cornwall, who's one of our active planning peers, just to explain the work that he's done and kind of why he does it as well. So hopefully there'll be a whole plethora of you thinking, oh, I'd like to do a bit of that as well. So hopefully you'll sign up as well at the end. So and then after that, we're going to stop the recording, and then we're actually going to go for some Q&A questions. So do fire your questions into Slido. We will try and get through as many as we possibly can at the end as we go. As I said, we are part of the LGA, so we are not government. We don't make the policy, but what we do try to do is help local authorities to respond to it and the work that they do. So yeah, please do fire your questions in. We've got a great team of people from PAS here. And I'll be passing all the really hard questions on to them anyway. So yeah, please do fire your stuff in. On that, I'm going to ask my colleague, Sarah. So Sarah's going to lead us off, just talking about the kind of changes around the local plan. And in which case, Sarah, over to you, if that's okay.
Thank you, Steve, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us along today, and it's great to be here and talking to you. So I'm Sarah Lewis, a Principal Consultant with the Planning Advisory Service. And as you may know, one of our main areas of work, particularly over the last few years, has been supporting councils with plan making. So we thought it'd be useful to have the session today to update you on what is happening on plan making and local plans in general. As councillors, you know you play a crucial role in local governance, and it is critical that you understand your local plan. Understanding your local plan will make sure that the right decisions are being made to ensure that the development of your area and the impact on your community aligns with your corporate goals. The local plan essentially is a spatial interpretation of what your corporate objectives might be. So in this presentation today, I'm going to cover recent and important development at a national level in terms of legislation and guidance, what work we're doing as PAS, what we've learned from our work, and also what's on the horizon, because as Steve said, there is an awful lot of change happening in the planning world. Next slide, please, Steve. So before I talk to you about the National Planning Policy Framework, I think it is worth reflecting on what's been happening and where we are now. There has been an awful lot of consultation, updates to policy and updates to guidance, and this has been confusing for both planners and non-planners alike. Sometimes it can just feel like an avalanche of information is coming your way, and trying to navigate and understand it is very difficult. It can also feel like a bit of a treasure hunt to understand when something's being implemented, how it's being implemented, and if it actually has been implemented yet. So the timing of when things are coming through, how they relate to each other, and what is happening is really kind of important to understand. As we go through this period of ongoing change in the planning system, one of the most important things you can do as councillors is to keep in touch with your planning officers, as they will know the day-to-day and will be able to give you feedback on what is happening. And that's particularly relevant if you're unsure what's happening in terms of national planning policy, guidance or legislation, and what's going to be implemented. So keep in touch with your officers. Moving on to National Planning Policy Framework, or the NPPF. This is the main document that sets policies in which local plans within your council must be in conformity with. The revised NPPF was consulted on in December 2022 and was published in December 2023. And the key overall message from the revised NPPF is to get your plan in place. And this is something that government remains absolutely committed to in terms of a plan-led system. Encouraging local authorities to maintain and progress their local plan is a message that continues to be shared by Joanna Averley, the Chief Planner. So preparing and maintaining an up-to-date plan should be seen as a priority. In terms of housing numbers and calculating housing need, not much has actually changed. There is a standard methodology, and the government stance is that all councils use the standard method to calculate housing need. The NPPF has clarified the position to say that the standing method is an advisory starting point. So it's that point that it's bringing in the word advisory, but it is still very much remaining as a starting point, and that position hasn't really changed. The NPPF also does make reference to exceptional circumstances where a different formula may be used to calculate housing need. However, only one example of exceptional circumstances is given, and this is based on demographics. Basically, if they're notably different because, and the example the NPPF uses, you may be an island with no land bridge where there is a high proportion of elderly residents. But the key point here is the demographic difference that would count as an exceptional circumstance. Equally, we do know of one authority who was able to use a different method, but this was because they were a development corporation and the level of data they needed to use to calculate housing need was so small it didn't really fit with the standard method, so they had to use an alternative approach to calculate a very small area housing need. So essentially, the NPPF advises that the standard method is used as a starting point to understand your future housing need. But what goes into your plan is your housing requirement. And this is the housing need figure adjusted after constraints have been factored in. I'm really sorry, this is terrible. I've just actually got someone knocking on the door. I'm going to have to just sort my dog out really quickly. Sorry about that.
Okay, so, all right, so I'll kind of pick up a little bit from where you were. Obviously, the 5-year housing land supply becomes quite an integral part of the understanding about the need requirement that you have for place for what you're going to have to deliver going forward. So obviously, this is a calculation that comes as part of the plan. There has been some changes regarding this that has been noted going forward, but principally it's about trying to allocate an amount of land which will allow development to kind of come forward over the time that's there.
I think the key point there as well, Steve, is that essentially what you might end up with is actually a housing requirement figure that's different from your housing need figure, because you have to take account of constraints that need to be factored in, and sometimes that can cause some confusion where those two figures are different. Lastly, just in terms of the NPPF then, it does offer some incentives to support councils in getting plans in place. Importantly, if you have a plan recently adopted, so one that is less than 5 years old, then councils are not required to identify and update the 5-year housing land supply on an annual basis. Equally, if your plan is at an advanced stage of preparation, so it's near submission is one example, then you only need to demonstrate a 4-year housing land supply until the plan is adopted. Next slide, please. So staying on the NPPF, I think the area that continues to be of interest is around the green belts. And in December 2022, the consultation version of the NPPF said that local authorities would not have to review their green belt if that was the only means of meeting housing needs. However, in the December 2023 publication version, the wording changed and the link to housing need was taken out. So the NPPF now says that local authorities are not required are not required to carry out a green belt review, but they may choose to review the green belt in exceptional circumstances. And that link to exceptional circumstances is something that continues to be in place. It was in place in the old NPPF and it is in the new as well. So the wording in the NPPF may actually embolden local authorities to not consider reviewing the green belt as a potential source of housing land supply to meet housing need. However, at examination, authorities may have to explain why the green belt has not been reviewed and if the local particularly if the local authority stance is that local housing need will not be met. The notion being that inspectors will test whether a council has left no stone unturned when looking for land to deliver housing. In terms of housing calculations, the 35% urban uplift for cities referred to in the planning practice guidance is now incorporated into the published NPPF. Including the uplift in the NPPF shows the government's commitment to this policy, which applies to the 20 most populated cities. What is interesting here is the potential tension for cities in delivering an uplifted housing figure while also having to reconcile the Greenbelt position. And so the focus is likely to be on brownfield land to support housing delivery in this case, and looking at alternative policies such as density to deliver the numbers involved. I think another point worth noting is a requirement for a local plan to be justified does remain in the revised NPPF. So the amendment to the test of soundness, which removed the justified test, was proposed in the consultation version, but this was firmly challenged, and so the test has been retained. And I think this is a really important test when it comes to local plan making for a plan to be justified. Lastly, I think it's worth noting and understanding the transition arrangements set out in the revised NPPF. So this applies to plans reaching the Regulation 19 stage after the 19th of March 2024. If a plan has already reached this point or been submitted for examination, then the previous NPPF applies. If you're unlikely to have a plan that's progressed this far, then the revised NPPF and the new local plan arrangements will apply. So this is for plans that are essentially submitted for examination after June 2025. And it's definitely worth asking your planning officer if you're unsure whether transition arrangements apply for your local plan. Next slide, please, Steve. So moving on to a bit more detail on local plans, it's interesting to see that the appetite for government intervention in local plans is growing, and this follows Gove's written ministerial statement on the 19th of December last year. 7 councils have been directed to produce timetables as local development schemes. There's also been intervention to ensure continuation in plan making, with the government intervening and stopping 4 councils withdrawing their local plans. The government wants to encourage all councils to check their local plan and consider if it needs reviewing in light of revised NPPF policies. And the government has also asked for all councils to send an updated timetable for plan making by spring this year. So that's definitely something to have on the radar, as that's coming up quite soon. In terms of plan making, it feels like we're kind of in between systems, and it's important to know whether your local plan is going to be adopted within the current system or if the new system will apply. The NPPF is clear that local plan submission for examination has to be on or before the 30th of June 2025, and this is a really key date for the local plan to be examined under the current system and current arrangements. For plans submitted after this date, the new arrangements apply, and that will mean a streamlined local plan prepared over a 30-month period, and there'll be other elements of that local plan in terms of planning that fall under planning reforms. I think an area that has raised a lot of interest and discussion has been whether the duty to cooperate is still needed when it comes to plan making. Obviously, this was something that was a very strong element of local plans in the past. So it is true that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act has rescinded the duty to cooperate. However, this is part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act that has not been enacted yet. So duty to cooperate still remains at the moment. It's also very much forms part of the current planning system and applies to plans submitted for examination on or before the 30th of June 2025. Looking beyond June next year, it's likely that there will probably be a requirement to collaborate and work with neighbours in some form, and this will probably sit within policy as it will no longer be legislated for. So next slide, please, Steve. So moving on, we just thought it would be helpful to share what support we offer through the Planning Advisory Service. So we do a lot of one-to-one work with councils, and we work with officers on project management and resourcing, looking at the evidence base to support a local plan. We also help out in being a critical friend in things like duty to cooperate processes and discussions, but also in other areas of plan making. We do a lot of template and prototyping, and we help officers to streamline processes and speed up processes so that they're in conformity with guidance. and policy. We share advice notes as well and make recommendations to councils, and we offer follow-up support, and you'll be hearing a bit more of that through the peer review work. So we also do peer-to-peer learning between officers and councils. We provide training, we run networks and events, and our website is full of really useful tools and case studies. So I would encourage you to have a look around our website. As you'll see, there is a section on local plans there, and there's a lot of information in there that is really useful to you as councils. Next slide, please, Steve. So we also thought it'd be helpful to share kind of what we've learned, what lessons we've learned about what councils do well and what is more of a challenge. The areas that I'm going to cover, we've identified as points of learning to help make plan making more efficient and effective. So one of the most important things to get right is in plan making is project management. It's important that timescales are realistic, the right resources are in place, and the project plan covers all stages in order to deliver a local plan on time. Another important area is around governance. As councillors, where you're so important in decision-making process and in governance, and it's important to have tight governance arrangements in place that everyone understands, as plan making can be a really long process. It is important to have a clear governance structure for local plan production, which sets out the type of decisions that can be made quickly, perhaps by officers or within a working group, and decisions which require wider consultation and sufficient time in the project plan to factor in approval and sign off. Having councillors in place to understand their role and local plan governance arrangements helps ensure there are no unknowns down the line that risk derailing the local plan. I think another area that can be quite tricky is around consultation and engagement, and this can be challenging for councils. We also know that statutory consultees have their own resourcing issues and their own timetabling for the way they work. So what's really important here is having good engagement plans and stakeholder mapping. That can be really helpful to know who you're talking to and when you're going to talk to them and about what. Also important is making the best use of time by discussing multiple matters in conversations with statutory consultees, as everyone is challenged in terms of time. And this also helps to forge constructive long-term relationships as well. So when it comes to evidence, understandably, councils can be risk averse because of the challenges faced at local plan examination. And so it's useful to understand what evidence is needed to support your local plan, what's in place already, because a lot of evidence will have been prepared for previous local plans. So what needs updating and what is an proportionate approach. And it's really helpful to consider the value of evidence and what it brings to the plan as well. And finally, it's worth considering leadership. We understand that political cycles can be quite short and there may be changes in senior leadership teams. The plan making process is a continual process and it can take a long time. So it's important the local plan is developed in the best interests of communities and that local plan is a corporate priority and governance arrangements are robust. This can be done by securing buy-in from senior leadership teams early on and really taking them along in that journey as well. Next slide, please, Steve. So I wanted just to kind of wrap up by just letting you know what's coming on the horizon. There is a rapid pace of change and there is a lot happening. As I've mentioned before, we're expecting reform planning system, which will be a lot about process. That's going to be kind of a big focus, really. And some of that will be is in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which received royal assent in October 2023. So that act contains many changes to the planning system. However, some of those have not come forward yet. Some of those aren't enacted. And we're expecting secondary legislation in autumn of this year that will provide a lot more detail. So that's definitely something to watch out for. I think probably the most important is the government's push for us to work in a faster, more streamlined way and to have a local plan in place within a 30-month period. So that is a real key challenge and key change to the planning system, the way that the local plan will look and that it will be more streamlined. We're also expecting further consultation on national development management policies. And if you've not heard of these are policies which currently sit in the local plan at the moment, but are pretty consistent across the country. So what the government's decided to do is to bring those policies up to a national level so that they don't need repeating at a local level. And it really then has a central place where there's a consistent approach to those kind of central policies. Another area of interest is around street votes consultation, and that's about developing street vote orders where residents on a street effectively grant planning permission for certain works. So probably a bit similar to kind of neighbourhood plans, but on a smaller scale. The infrastructure levy is also being considered, and we've seen one consultation already. We're likely to see another about how the infrastructure levy might work before we see regulations coming forward around this. And then something I'm sure you're all interested in is climate change and net zero. I think the first thing to say is that the local plan is not the only answer here, but it's very much part of a multiple range of interventions, policy and regulations. So the local plan does have a strong role to play in this issue, but it's part of that kind of joined up approach and holistic approach. The government in the NPPF has added some additional weight to policy on energy efficiency and retrofit and adaptation of buildings. So that's something that is a really kind of important change coming forward. And you'll see that there are also future home standards being introduced as part of that as well. I think the other point to make here is that actually this is where authorities are tending to kind of run ahead of central policy as well. And there's some really innovative authorities out there that are looking at how local plans can support net zero ambitions. So I think the only thing to say when it comes to climate change and net zero is it can be quite challenging in terms of planning balance, and how I think it's important to consider how development is being brought forward and balanced against kind of net zero requirements as well. And it's about thinking about how we are going to deliver our priorities. And I think as councillors, there can be tough decisions for you in terms of competing policy priorities, particularly and how those are going to be reconciled and what can be expected from development coming forward. And so it's really important to be aware of like where your local plan sits within that and the policies within your local plan. And finally, the other area of change is potentially around next government, and we wait to see what we can expect in the way of further change, and that's how this will affect plan making in the future. So in summary, the key takeaways from the presentation are to know your local plan, and if you're unsure of anything, please do ask your planning officers. The government is keen to encourage councils to have an up-to-date local plan in place, and there are now incentives in the NPPF to support plan making. It's also important to understand how transition between the current and the coming systems affect your local plan. So is your local plan going to be something that falls within the current system, or is it going to be prepared over a longer time frame and actually you will need to look ahead and prepare for the new system as well? So that's something to really understand at this stage. And then, as I said before, having an updated timetable for your local plan has been requested by government to be shared in the spring. And finally, just generally, it's useful to just look at the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, as this does contain a lot of change around planning, and this legislation will have an impact on your local plan in the coming months and years. So thank you very much for today. Apologies for my barking dog. He would have barked through the rest of the presentation and caused lots of noise. So I did have to scoot at a very untimely timely stage.
Fine. That's
but happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And there's lots of really interesting questions actually coming in on Slido as well. So we'll kind of come back to those as we go. So you've got a bit of a heads up, Sarah, to have a look through that whilst we're going through the rest of the presentation. So I'm now going to ask my colleague Peter Ford just to kind of come in, just to kind of talk through some of the changes around development management, so the handling of planning applications, some of the proposals that have been announced and muted for coming forward. So Pete, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, and hello everybody. Very pleased to be here. I'm also a principal consultant at the Planning Advisory Service. So what I would like to do this afternoon is to basically give you a very quick overview of development management. I'm sure you're aware of development management and the work that PAS is currently doing to support councils. And I'm going to focus the main part of the presentation on what we are learning from going into councils, and also most importantly what's on the horizon in 2024. So next slide, please, Steve. So just to remind you Development management is very much revolves around the planning applications process and being able to achieve quick decisions, but also defendable outcomes and ultimately delivery on the ground. Your role on the development management side is probably going to be around the planning committee, if you're on planning committee, or as a ward councillor in representing your residents on particular planning applications. Planning committee is a quasi-judicial role, so therefore you as an independent councillor have as much a sway as any other member on that planning committee. So a very important role. And also planning enforcement, a very key part of development management, whether development is built in accordance with planning permission or whether it has planning permission. And again, I'm sure you're all involved in planning enforcement cases in your local councils. So next slide, please, Steve. So what is it important to know about development management? Well, first point about the tremendous local and national political interest in development management. There's a lot of talk at the moment, obviously following on from Sarah's discussion about the local plans process, also about the outcomes, the decisions that are being made and the challenges to those decisions gets both national interest and local interest. I'm sure in your inboxes you have a lot of inquiries about planning matters in your local area. There's also, you would have noticed over the years, an increase in permitted development. More and more development which previously you had to get planning permission for has been taken out of the planning system, either altogether or through a prior approval process. You also would have noticed that the fees have increased, very welcomed. In December, the government announced increases in all planning application fees, and they will continue to increase year by year. And this adds extra income into planning departments. There's a huge issue, particularly in development management, but in all areas of planning, on recruitment and retention. Recruiting those really experienced planning officers who can deal with those complex planning applications, and also retaining local government planners. Either they are leaving the profession altogether or going to the private sector. So there's a huge challenge there. Development management is becoming more and more complex. When I started in planning about 30 odd years ago, it was a much simpler process. And for you as members and for officers, there's a lot more to consider now than you had to previously. And also with regards to performance rules. And if you go on to the next slide, please, Steve. Just like to dwell on this for a minute. So the government measures performance of councils' planning departments, not only through the local plan process, which Sarah's just outlined, but also through the development management process. And this is the speed and quality of decision making. At the moment, there are 3 councils in the country who are designated, i.e. an applicant can bypass the council and go straight to the planning inspectorate to have their decisions made. There are also 17 councils who are currently awaiting a decision from the government on whether they will be designated over the speed of decision making. And there are quite a few other councils, probably about 12, who are in danger of designation over quality of decision making. So there is it's a key part of development management that it is being measured and it is being scrutinised very greatly by central government. So next slide, please. So what are we doing at PAS to support councils? Well, our main programme is supporting those councils who either are designated or are under threat of designation. And the type of work that we do development management focused peer challenges. We do planning committee training or reviewing planning committees, reviewing the function of planning committees. And we also look inwardly into the processes in development management through development management reviews. And we also do a lot of officer training through appeals training, customer service training, etc. We also try and put as much as we can on our website, and we've got a lot of self-learning. Just recently, there's been a guidance put up on the scheme of delegation for planning committee and also code of good practice. And also through the PAS bulletin, which hopefully you all get, we will announce things, support that we can provide and things we think you need to know. So next slide, please, Steve. So just looking at the learnings, we go into a lot of councils and provide support to them. One of the key things we are finding out is that good decision making is very much dependent on the up-to-date local plan. If you have an up-to-date local plan, you generally have sound decision making. Conversely, if you haven't got an up-to-date local plan, very much dependent on the National Planning Policy Framework, and that is where appeals are often lost. Members and officers working together and being trained, and often trained together. This is particularly important at planning committee. When officers and members have mutual respect, when they understand clearly each other's roles, that is key to making good, sound decisions. It is becoming harder for councils to make quick and defendable decisions. This is both through resourcing, obviously through the staff available to make decisions in a timely manner, but also the increased complexity of the development management process. Engaging with residents, agents and developers is becoming more important than ever. It's always been important, obviously, but good engagement, particularly at the pre-application stage, where developers are able to articulate to residents the proposal, and also residents, often through the ward councillors, being able to express their concerns or their support is really, really important, and is even more important now than ever. And also the importance of investing in leadership and efficiency, having good leadership at both member and officer level, and also never underestimate the importance of the back office system, the way the software works to be able to get the throughput of planning applications through the system. Next slide, please, Steve. So critically, what is on the horizon for 2024? What do we think you need to know with regards to development management? Well, first of all, technical information. There is more and more technical information that officers and you as members, particularly if you're on planning committee, need to grapple with. In a few minutes, Krista is going to talk about biodiversity net gain. That is one of the key areas of technical information where the sharp end of it is through the planning applications process. More on design and beauty. Michael Gove has recently been speaking about this idea of beauty, having beautiful developments, how that's going to be articulated and how you're going to understand that for your council is through the design coding process and the mandatory design codes. So again, they are coming forward. They are going to be your key tool for expressing design. More emphasis on designation for underperforming councils. The government has stated its desire to ensure that councils are making timely and quality decisions, and there has been an indication that there's an appetite to designate those more of those councils who are underperforming. And allied with that is changes in the performance criteria. There will shortly be, we understand, a consultation on changes in the performance criteria. We're not quite sure what that's going to consist of, but that will change the goalposts on the performance that councils will be expected to meet with regards to plan application performance. There's going to be greater scrutiny of statutory consultees. As we know, the timeliness of making decisions is dependent very much on statutory consultees coming forward and giving their responses in a timely way. We understand the government is going to put more scrutiny on those statutory consultees. And on a more positive note, cost recovery for some application types. In the autumn statement, this was announced, the idea that for some types of applications, and we're not quite sure which ones they will be, a council will be able to get full cost recovery, so i.e. for full costs of actually determining that application. And that is likely to be through an amended planning performance agreement arrangement. Next slide, please, Steve. And also action against irresponsible applicants. This is a really interesting one, and actually very much a change from what has been traditionally, you know, the permission goes with the land idea. So if applicants are not building out their proposals as they consented for, or they are not meeting the conditions, then that can, we understand, will be a material planning consideration for any future application that applicant makes. The idea of street votes, and Sarah mentioned this, so I won't dwell on this, but it's from a development management point of view of actually effectively saying certain types of developments in streets, if there's enough support for it, there'll be a faster track planning approval process to go through. And also, again, as Sarah mentioned, the national development management policies. A lot of the policies which development management case officers will quote are from the local plan. This is a step change where actually the development management policies, which are consistent for all councils, won't be in the local plan, but they will be at a national level. And then the changes in permitted development legislation. There's a whole raft of permitted development legislation that is being consulted on at the moment and will change. So that is putting more development that currently requires planning permission under permitted development or prior approval. Things like building bigger extensions, building upward extensions, changes of use from things like retail to residential, the relaxation of electric vehicle charging, and air source heat pumps to take some of these things out of a planning system. But very interestingly, putting some further constraints into the planning system. And the one which is capturing the headlines at the moment is short-term lets. So a council's ability to be able to restrict short-term lets is something which is going the other way, if you like. And also, just lastly, the horizon, which I'll bring up, is about income through increased fees. So the fees have increased, they will increase again. Will it help? It will start filtering through in 2024. Is this going to enable planning authorities to be better resourced? We'll wait and see. So just to finish, what I would like to do is just put three questions that you might want to ask your officers at the moment about what's coming up in 2024. So the first one is about your current position on performance. It's really important. Hopefully you are aware of this. If you're not, ask your officers about where you are with performance. Are you meeting your targets on speed and quality of decision making? When we know what new criteria is coming out, again, will that change things? Will that change a goalpost? Will that put you in any vulnerability? So second question, a suggestion you might want to ask is about the permitted development changes. What impact will it have on your council? It will have different impact to different councils. So are short-term lets an issue in your council? talk to your officers about what changes you can make to restrict that further with the new youth class order which is coming in, or other issues like upward extensions, etc. And finally, just say that training, there is an awful lot of additional information that you will need to grapple with, particularly whether you're on planning committee, and make sure that that training is being put in place. Officers need the training, but also you as members do. Say particularly if you're on planning committee or if you're representing your local constituents, it's really important that you know what you need to know about the changes coming forward. So they're my 3 questions I suggest you might want to ask officers. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. That's great. I mean, there's again some really interesting questions coming on the slide there regarding kind of decision making and also around performance as well. Lots of really interesting questions about performance actually. So we can come back to some of those later on. I'm now going to ask my colleague Krista Patrick to come in and just talk through some of the changes that have been happening around kind of planning in the environment. There's quite a number of things in this. Have been quite active over the last, have started to bite very, very recently actually, and have been kind of coming over a bit of time. So, Krista, over to you.
Thanks very much, Steve. And yeah, hi, I'm Krista Patrick, Principal Consultant at PAS, working on a Natural England funded project helping councils understand how to embed nature across all of their council services. So just to start off with, this slide says an overview and guide to strategy for councils. So what I'm going to kind of cover really is some of the hot topics that are out there. Similar to other sessions that have been delivered, we'll cover how we can help, some of the specific funded programs that we're delivering, some key learning and what's coming up on the horizon. Also, similar to Pete's just kind of presented there, some key questions that you might want to take away, have a think about and ask within your own council. So next slide, please, Steve. So we'll start with the Environment Act 2021, which introduced a whole range of key requirements, some of which we do understand. So there's been some questions in the Slido about biodiversity net gain, and biodiversity net gain kicked in last week, which you probably heard about, and it's going to affect all new major planning applications from now on, and going to come in later on in the year for non-major planning applications. So some of this, is we know what's happening with B&G. There's still lots to kind of unpick in terms of that, but some of this is also very much an evolving piece, and plays alongside other commitments that you've made about the environment as a council. So whether you've made a local statement about climate and the ecological emergency, and you have carbon reduction targets, all of this goes into the same melting pot. So planning interacts with all of these kind of key issues around nature, waste, water, plus a number of other areas as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of hot topics in 2024, drawn a bit closer to think about the planning side of things. And again, for the first time, we've got local nature recovery strategies being produced. So there's 48 of them currently in production. They follow largely county areas, so larger unitary areas and some combined authority areas that are charged with making them. So you've got 2 roles there, those that are making them, the responsible authorities, and then those that are feeding into it also play a key role, and they're the supporting authorities. So it's the first time that these have ever been done, and they're an opening statement really, I would say, in terms of what's where in terms of nature. What are the kind of important nature areas that we've got in an area, what good looks like in terms of their current status and condition, and what we might be able to do to make them better, and obviously what are the opportunities to improve them, where can we look at joining partnerships and funding opportunities to improve our natural environment. And it's early days in terms of to say that in terms of success, but success will be dependent on moving kind of plans to actually kind of delivery on the ground, and local nature recovery strategies are an important part of the process to kind of get those collaborations and those funding opportunities. And we're likely to see kind of adoption of those local nature recovery strategies towards the end of the year and early 2025. The 10% increase in biodiversity net gain for planning applications means that, particularly if you're on planning committee, you'll start to see these requirements coming through in planning applications, and hopefully, see a better commitment to restore, preserve and enhance habitats both on-site and off-site locally. So there's some real opportunities there, not only on-site but also off-site. There's also a new initiative called Protected Site Strategies, which have been designed by Natural England as a way of using the convening power to try and get a number of different organisations to work together, improve some of our most special sites like SSSIs, for example. But because of poor quality, it's not simple or getting one farmer organisation to do things. And that's what protected site strategies are supposed to do. It's about that convening power of bringing lots of different people together. And obviously, we're doing all of this within the context of sharpening public focus about water, rivers more generally, and whether it's just water availability, people talking about water quality and flooding too. Next slide, please. So it's fair to say that there's a lot going on the environmental planning side. In PAS, it's quite new, and we've only been going a couple of years. Our kind of green wing been going a couple of years and grown from having quite little to say about the environment to having quite a lot to say about it. And it's almost half of what we do now. So we don't just work with the Department of Levelling Up, but we work with DEFRA and Natural England. And it's what organisations like PAS often end up doing, is taking various bits of government that are talking about lots of different similar kind of things, and perhaps in different ways, and trying to kind of synthesize these and drawing these up so that it actually makes sense for local government and councils like yours. So there's lots of different initiatives coming through, whether that's biodiversity net gain, local nature recovery strategies, protected site strategies. How do we make sense of that? How does that all fit together under one umbrella, and obviously look towards achieving those ambitions in terms of particularly in terms of our environment and sustainability and placemaking. So one of the key things at the moment in terms of our offer is it is mainly officer centric at the moment, focused on understanding the technical and regulatory side of things. But we are looking to start talking about the politics and leadership, because that's what's really going to drive this. And it's also a way of unlocking all of the potential that you've got. And an occurring theme in our work is that we're, really incredibly passionate, switched on people there working in councils that want to move this agenda on, but perhaps don't know how to, or kind of who to engage with in terms of the wider council and the wider corporate body. And obviously in terms of yourselves as councillors have a really important role there. So one thing really is, is understand who, those kind of real keen kind of, it's about personalities and politics, and, kind of go back and particularly with the questions that we've got, kind of find out who is doing that kind of stuff and ask them some questions. So next slide, please. So how can we help? Well, we've got a big officer network, particularly with biodiversity net gain, as our main focus has been the deadline for the introduction of biodiversity net gain. I think I remember, Steve, I can't remember where we're currently at in terms of our officer network. I think last mentions where it was around 800, it might be more. And again, go back and check who is the kind of officer that sits on that and sits on that network. And if your local authority officer hasn't got somebody that sits on that, then obviously we can, kind of get them signed up. But the key thing here is that obviously what we're keen to ensure is that biodiversity net gain isn't seen as something that's very technical, very scary, very big. And, how do we kind of make it as simple as possible? Obviously, there is lots of technical stuff there, but how do we make it as simple as possible, particularly with mandatory net gain kicking in? So you'll notice on this slide that there's a councillor guide that doesn't have an underline on it. It's something that we were hoping to have ready for today, but it will be out soon, and we will look to cover what you need to know, particularly when sitting on a planning committee, about what you can reasonably request from developers in terms of what you can and what you can't do. But we have already got lots of really great resources that colleagues have put together in terms of biodiversity net gain that are on our website. So again, go to our website in terms of that, and there's lots of frequently asked questions on there. There's also a nature recovery toolkit which we're launching in the spring, And it's a structured approach and a process to take your council through three key pieces, really, key areas, which is about, you know, saying that you as a council probably own land, you deliver services, and you have a real powerful network, but that's parish councils, nature trusts, local nature partnerships. So, you know, have you done all that you can as a council to actually kind of really make the most of that and delivering all the best possible opportunities for improving nature? But there are other things that you could do fairly easy and therefore have a good impact, you know, moving from business as usual. What kind of business as usual things are going on, and how can you improve them? What are the quick wins? Is it, you know, actually declaring a ecological emergency? Is it identifying a nature champion? Is it changing the way in which contracts are written, or are there kind of other things that can be done? And obviously, of course, some of you will know what we mean by nutrient neutrality, which is one of the most challenging areas that PAS has been working on. And we've been working with those catchments that have had a nutrient neutrality notice issue because of river pollution. And there's been a recent round of money awarded for that. And again, you know, colleagues have been working with those councils to understand how to set up mitigation schemes. And I mentioned before about protected site strategies. These, you know, as part of that, we're not really waiting to be told what they're going to go and do and how they're going to work. We're actually going to get out there and find a few places to pilot some of these and see if they actually do the job of piloting, helping people work together and improve these real, you know, kind of important protected sites. Next slide, please, Steve. So what we're learning, what we're thinking, I think, you know, every day is a school day for us. It's all quite new. There's lots to learn, and there's lots always coming out that we need to kind of understand and kind of help understand, you know, local authorities understand what it means for them. And the main thing that we kind of wrestle with is whether we collectively understand the role or opportunity for local government. So that's whether you're saying you want to be more involved in the management of water quality. You've got a real opportunity to perhaps represent the needs of water and river users, and how are you going to get involved? So, but there are also risks, and we don't fully understand what incentives are out there to help step up and deliver on some of these complicated agendas. There's a movable feast, whether that's environmental land management and other types of grants that are out there. And what are the potential long-term risks in terms of, you know, moving projects forward and the funding that's available there. But personally, we feel that it would be remiss not to use the fact that you own lots of land and you know lots of people and delivering lots of services, and that you've got both hard and soft powers. And there's an interesting, really kind of useful report that I'll share in the chat, the UK 100 report that did a net zero report, powers in place last year. They've done a nature report this year, which kind of just sets out a bit of an encyclopedia really of local authority powers in relation to nature. So that's really useful. But also you've got communities standing behind you and having a convening role to take some of that energy, you know, and that heat that comes to you. You know, how can communities help deliver on this? So yeah, we don't fully understand the role, but we're convinced that local government will end up being an important part of the solution of making things better. So there is more work to be done, more things to be learnt about, and this is constantly evolving. But it's fantastic that we have finally got to think and act about nature, not just from a planning perspective, where previously, you know, we have protected areas, but switching, or protected other kind of other areas, but switching to being more proactive and actually making something happen in a place, making it get better and linking up with other areas, whether that's nature corridors or other sites, that actually you can actually start integrating nature with other land uses. So it's not just whether, you know, nature or nothing, or it's actually seeing how we can embed this. And it's a long-term commitment delivery that's going to bear, you know, fruit quite quickly. And another interesting thing when talking to the public about climate change and carbon reduction is quite a tough sell if you're not talking to the people that are already very keen. But instead, what we're saying, to improve nature, we need kind of pollinators, birds, quite relatable things. And therefore, you know, this does relate to, you know, people and members of the public that are, I think we're really pushing at the open door with communities there, and a real strong agenda. But there's also an interesting position for councils on how you start to begin to engage with something that's at the heart that has a market concept in the middle of it. So when you're thinking about planning, you would start from a regulatory perspective, but we're now seeing organisations like the Environment Bank or others, you know, kind of offset providers buying sites, investing in them, creating improved habitats because they believe they can sell them on to people that are going to have a need for these in terms of mitigation. And we're starting to see some really interesting groups of councils setting up special purpose vehicles as arm's length organisations that can trade and operate more freely than councils can. This is definitely happening. You know, Plymouth, there's also other areas that are looking at this, including Greater Manchester. So, you know, one thing that is difficult, that it's quite easy to kind of get into a bit of a spin about all the benefits that, you know, around health, economy, carbon, how it's all linked up. And we are, you know, kind of getting further guidance coming in from government soon around the land use framework, and sometimes it feels all complicated and not sure what the first step is. But practically, what do you do tomorrow is a really interesting question, and that's what the Nature Recovery Toolkit that we're looking at is, what are those quick wins that you can do to help you understand, you know, how ambitious you want to be, and also, you know, how practically you can start delivering stuff. Next slide. So I think, you know, what's on the horizon. We got next slide, I think. Let's have a look there, Steve. That's the one, Environmental Improvement Plan. So I think there's two things on the horizon. Environment Improvement Plan is a kind of massive collection of targets that are there and that have been set by government to kind of meet the ambitions around nature and reverse the decline in nature. And it applies to UK PLC. So we're going to have lots more hectares protected, a lot more trees planted, etc. And there's a key thing here in terms of translation requirement, in terms of saying, well, this is what's required at a national level. How do councils play its part in delivering on these kind of requirements? And if it does require, you know, us to do something differently or spend money, how does that stack up? Because trees are great, but they're not free, and you have to maintain them. So there's a job for us all to unpack the targets in the Environmental Improvement Plan, which are big and long term, and try to turn them into things that are practical and understandable for us in the short term. So alongside that, the government is also pushing, you know, kind of speeding up delivery of everything, and particularly how we think about infrastructure for energy and for water. And everything that supports life, really, and that plays into, you know, kind of different requirements in terms of urban and rural places and kind of pressures between the two there. Next slide, please, Steve. So there's a conversation to be had about the impact or disruption which might be felt for rural places and urban places, and how do you make sure that feels fair and balanced. And alongside that, in a year or two's time, also going to be looking at how you simplify how the environment is turning to be less about paper and more about management of outcomes. And I think, you know, that kind of environmental outcomes requirement is really important, and how do you measure that? Next slide. So, you know, similar to Pete, we kind of prepared a crib sheet of questions to take away and use back at your council. You know, starting with the basics, you know, around biodiversity net gain is here. Have you sorted out how to get ecological advice and planning committee properly trained? What can we do and what can we not do to get biodiversity net to work for us as a council? Have we even got some opportunities to get land into biodiversity net gain? And I've seen some questions there on Slido about that, so we can come back to that on the discussion. There's also the green infrastructure standards that have been published by Natural England. So these are more for urban places. So if you're tightly bound urban place that you might want to spend, you know, perhaps not as much time on B&G, but perhaps more focus on the green infrastructure standards, which is about how you introduce nature into urban environments. One of the other questions that, you know, in terms of asking is whether this actually matters, you know, for you as a council, and what it does, you know, in terms of its land, and that will differ between different types of councils. But obviously, if you have a corporate objective about health and health outcomes, nature can do some great work there. But also, it needs to get airtime amongst all the other priorities, and particularly other busy service heads. How do you talk to them about, you know, kind of embedding nature across their priorities? Because everyone wants to talk about budgets, no one wants to talk about nature. So sometime, you know, I think the job as a councillor to understand the community perspective and get buy-in and people to have a say. And I think lastly, you know, how much do your officers, you know, kind of feel and kind of take this into account in terms of, you might have a view on how important nature is, but what about your colleagues, your other kind of councillor colleagues? So keep saying it, you know, kind of make sure that, you know, kind of people are supported. If they want to spend some more energy on this, how do you kind of support them? And again, you know, one of the key things through the Nature Recovery Toolkit is to really have that conversation and provide some resources to actually start that conversation across councils and across different council services. So lastly, in terms of the other kind of bits in terms of the crib sheet, you know, actually key thing here is, have you recognised whether you've, you know, whether you've started and where are you up to in terms of this? Have you organised, sorry about this, have you organised yourself differently in terms of a governance perspective, in terms of different directorates and portfolios? Have you got a nature champion? But obviously, you know, I think this is environmental agenda sometimes doesn't usually break down neatly into divisional silos. So when we're talking about health, environment, economy, you know, how do we kind of work across the council? So yeah, a key thing, I think, last point really is, do you have a champion? Is it recognised in someone's portfolio? And what have you done to date, really? So I think that's kind of like some of the key questions there. Handing back over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Krista. That's great. Again, you know, there's lots of things in there you can see, but and some of these things are quite fundamental changes to how planning has responded to nature generally. And there is a real kind of uptick in learning, if you like, for the service, to be quite honest. So professional planners across the country are having to really look at this, and it's very, very new for them, if you like, of how the planning service is going to have to respond to some of these. So thanks, Krista, that's great. I'm just going to quickly take a couple of minutes here just to say we've covered quite a lot in those kind of just those three presentations. It just goes to show that how much principally could be changing around planning at the moment. And this is something that all the professional planners, all of your planners in the council are having to deal with and sort of recognise what this means. But one of the things that we are very, very aware of is that planning is not just done by planners. Planning is actually done by the relationship between officers and members. Members have a real key role in planning. So when we do a number of pieces of work with councils across the country, we regularly work with our planning peers from across all the political parties to sort of undertake pieces of work, just because the role of the councillor is so fundamental. Now, whether that be as a portfolio holder sitting on committee, or as part of a local plan steering group, or as a planning committee member, or as a chair of the planning committee, but also as ward councillors as well. Just because the role of engaging in the planning system is pretty tough. It's pretty hard to understand, and so actually that being that role as the conduit, if you like, to be able to represent your ward, represent your electorate into the planning system becomes quite key. And if you kind of, the more you can understand about the system, the easier it kind of works, if you like, to be able to do. So we just wanted to just say this, we do a number of things with our councillor peers. So we don't run the peer group, the political groups run the peer group, but obviously we work with them a lot. So we're super keen to have well-informed and active kind of members in that pool. So what we do a number of things. We run planning peer challenges, so looking at whole services, a whole planning service. We can look at quite specific bits where we put a team of people, officers and members together to go in and have a look. We also do committee reviews where we will use either one of ourselves from PAS or one of our consultants working with a planning peer to have a look at how a committee's working and give some advice about how it can be improved. And we also do things around committee training as well, and wider kind of councillor training sessions as well. And also we sort of do where it is deemed as a request, we put individuals in contact with the political groups to be able to set up mentoring and development opportunities as well between peers. It's such a kind of a key role. We're super keen to sort of like, you know, help to promote that, if you like. So I've put a couple of links up there of just emails. So Adam Payton's email, who's kind of the lead peer for the indie group, as well as the independent group LGA link as well. So if you are interested, I think you might want to be a peer. The kind of contact details are on there. I'm now going to ask Councillor Julian German from Cornwall just to kind of say a few words. Julian's an active peer for us and regularly works with a number of the PAS team on a number of different things. So just to kind of get his take really on the work that he's done and his role as a peer.
Thanks very much. So great you've put the contact details up, because that was going to be one of the points that I was going to make. I'm going to be brief because I'm aware that I'm between you and getting your questions answered. So I won't take too long. I've been a councillor for over 20 years, and I'm a planning peer, so hopefully that gives you enough confidence about why I'm speaking to you, rather than sort of running through the breadth of my experience. But in terms of my experience, what I would like to say is that I've neither been a planning portfolio holder nor a planning committee chair. So you don't have to have reached those heights to understand planning and to be able to do the peer role with the Planning Advisory Service. So I do encourage you all, you're on this call, so you're obviously interested. So please do get in touch. The reason that I do it is because it's nice to go and help colleagues around the country, obviously, but also for personal development, that by finding out more, by learning more, then hopefully I can be a better councillor in my ward, but also that learning that we can bring back into our councils as well, and hopefully help play our role in improving our councils to be the best planning authority that they can be. So in terms of those experiences around the country, you get to see good practice, you get to see some poorer practice, but more than that, you get to understand why those situations have arisen, and then how to move forward if it's a poor performing authority, how to go on that journey. If you're doing peer mentoring, for example, then you may well be part of that journey rather than going in for a snapshot as well. So all of that learning and understanding, again, is something that you can use for your personal development and making a difference in your authority. So I think also it's an area where traditionally independents and also Greens can play an active role in our authorities. So we're not necessarily in leadership in our authorities, unfortunately, but with planning being an apolitical role, then that representation through planning committees in their work as ward councillors, but also back to the start of the presentations and thinking about local plans, the importance of cross-party working groups to getting successful local plan through the political system. So there's a number of areas where independents have been able to play key roles in planning development, and perhaps an area where it's easier for us to be more actively involved, and where the parties let us do that. So I think in terms of Pete said about what questions would you ask, so from going around the country, some of the things that strike me as learning points are looking at appeals. So the start of the answer to this also is around the differences around the country. So lots of aspects of planning, however statutory that may be, are done differently in different places. So the example I was going to use of looking at planning appeals, we do that through planning committees. In other places, you'll do that maybe through your governance committee, maybe through a planning working group, maybe through the portfolio holder. So these things are done differently in different places. So just to bear that in mind. For us, it's our planning committee looking at appeals, but it's all very well reporting on appeals. How many appeals, to use the terminology, have we won or lost? But understanding the reasons, understanding, are there themes for your council about how we've successfully defended those appeals around this particular type of application, or are there themes around we keep on losing when decisions are made in this regard to planning? Understanding that and being able to take the opportunity then to think about how do we change our processes, or how do we recognise that good practice. I think one of the interesting things in planning, we talk about determination times, and we'll have the spreadsheet of how many applications have been determined. There's the issue of, well, that's an interesting statistic, but how well have they been determined? And that might play back into appeal decisions as well. But also how many, so we record at different intervals for non-determination, but how many cases have you got sitting under officers' desks that have been there for over a year? And it amazes me that when I've seen a couple of authorities that I've been to around the country who sort of managed to put away non-determined cases because they've already breached the government rules. They're not going to get in any more trouble if they just carry on and on. But we've seen examples of 5 years plus non-determined cases in local authorities, which I'm just amazed that how applicants haven't been banging the door down. But it's something that we don't really think about and ask our officers about. So that's one of the points of learning for me. And finally, around planning committees, using informal sessions, or at the end of planning committees, just taking time, not necessarily every time, but perhaps you've had a particular application or a particular issue arisen, and at the end of the committee, just being able to say, let's take 10 minutes informally after the committee and see what we can learn from that and what we might want to feed back into future processes. So really just wanting to promote the idea to you that you're here because you know about planning, you're interested in planning, and you could be a planning peer working alongside the planning advisory service. So I'm going to let you get some of your questions answered now. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Julian. Really, really kind of helpful. And yeah, it's really interesting looking at 340 odd local authorities all using the same planning system, and it's all done slightly differently everywhere. But I suppose the one big thing I think you kind of touched on it there is the fact that actually the role that members play is so important, and actually planners have to keep themselves up to speed with this because it changes a lot. Helping members to be able to keep up to speed with this as well about some of the changes, that reliance on sort of the relationship with the officers, if you like, to be able to do that, because it's such an important role. Thank you so much, Julian. Marion, do you want to come in and just say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Firstly, a very big thank you to everyone for attending and the comments which I've been watching in the chat, and I hope we'll get a chance to get some answers and discussion going on those. And a big thank you to our speakers, Sarah Lewis, Peter Ford and Krista Patrick. They were really thorough presentations, some of which I was, some of us I think would be quite incensed by, but you rightly kept a midline and simply stated the facts. So much appreciate that. Well done. And I look forward to seeing the slides which we'll be sharing so that everybody can access those and maybe share them with colleagues if you'd like to. And also thanks for the extra information that came in chats. And I don't know if we can start by, one of the questions was from Councillor Holroyd. I don't know if you can come in. We did put in the chat. Would you like to put your question forward, Councillor Holroyd? Otherwise, we'll go back to your Slido system.
Okay, so in a minute, I'm just going to stop the recording because one of the things you said is we record the session and